The sun beat down on the massive construction site as heavy machinery rumbled in the background. Marcus Ellis wiped sweat from his brow and reviewed the blueprints he'd brought in his backpack. Though he was hired as a general site technician, Marcus held a degree in civil engineering, a fact few people on site knew, mostly because no one ever asked. From the moment he arrived on this job, it was clear he wasn't taken seriously, not because of his skills, but because of the assumptions made about him. He was black, young, and quiet, and to some, that meant inexperienced or unqualified. The worst offender was Rick Dawson, the project's foreman. Gruff mid-50s and always barking orders, Rick barely looked Marcus in the eye and rarely let him speak in meetings. That morning, during a routine site check, Marcus had spotted a critical issue in the concrete reinforcement layout. If left unaddressed, it could compromise the entire foundation of the building. He brought it up calmly to Rick, near the site trailer. "Hey, Rick," Marcus said, holding out the plans. "I think there's a misalignment in the rebar configuration on level B3. If the tension loads hit wrong..." Rick didn't even let him finish. "Oh, please," Rick scoffed, laughing in front of two other workers. "We've got licensed engineers for that, kid. Why don't you stick to hauling materials and stay in your lane?" The others chuckled awkwardly, and Marcus stood there, humiliated. He wanted to push back, to show Rick his credentials, but something stopped him. He knew this wasn't the moment. This wasn't the way. Instead, he folded up the blueprints, nodded silently, and returned to his work. Not because he accepted the treatment, but because he knew something they didn't. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Later that week, Marcus stayed late on site after most of the crew had clocked out. He set up a small folding table inside the trailer, spreading out revised schematics and a few structural load calculations he had run on his laptop. His instincts about the rebar issue kept nagging at him. He knew it wasn't just a theoretical flaw, it was a real risk, and ignoring it could lead to cracks in the foundation within a year of completion. Instead of storming back to Rick, Marcus decided to go a different route. He emailed his findings, along with his full engineering credentials, directly to the senior project manager, Claire Whitmore. Claire had only briefly met Marcus during the early onboarding phase, and hadn't interacted with him since. Still, he believed she might actually read what he sent, especially if he presented it professionally. To Marcus's surprise, Claire replied that same night. Subject: RE, structural concern. Level B3. Marcus, thanks for flagging this. Your analysis is sharp. Let's meet tomorrow morning before the daily site review. Bring your notes. Claire. The next day, Claire met him in her office trailer, flipping through his schematics and listening carefully. "You ran all of this yourself?" she asked, impressed. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus nodded. "It's based on the original plans, but I cross-checked the new adjustments from the last update." Claire leaned back in her chair. "Good catch. I'll need our engineering consultants to confirm, but if this holds up, you may have just saved this project a multi-million-dollar repair." She gave him a long, measuring look. "Tell me, Marcus, why are you working as a site tech if you're licensed?" He hesitated before answering. "I applied for engineering roles. No one called back. This job at least got me through the door." Claire didn't respond right away. She nodded slowly, then picked up her phone. As Marcus stepped out of her trailer, he caught sight of Rick across the yard, still barking orders like usual. The foreman didn't even glance in his direction. He had no idea that the very worker he mocked just hours ago was about to become a name that mattered. And Marcus, he didn't need to shout. He had just let his work speak for him. By the end of the week, something shifted on site. It started small. A few extra glances from senior staff, a couple of engineers nodding at Marcus with subtle recognition. Rick noticed too, though he dismissed it at first. He couldn't imagine that the kid he brushed off was getting any real attention. But when Claire showed up at the morning meeting, flanked by the head engineer and a city inspector, everyone sensed something serious was about to drop. "We're halting work on level B3, Claire announced. "There's a critical reinforcement flaw. We're correcting it based on the recalculations sent in by Marcus Ellis." Heads turned. The crew looked between Marcus and Claire, stunned. Claire continued, "Marcus is a licensed civil engineer. He caught what our consultants missed. That kind of attention to detail and initiative deserves recognition. Rick scoffed loudly, arms crossed. With respect, Claire, we've got seasoned engineers on this project. We don't take structural notes from field techs with Google degrees. Claire's eyes narrowed. Rick, he holds a degree from Georgia Tech and passed his PE last year. And thanks to him, we're not weeks away from pouring a flawed foundation. The silence in the trailer was thick. Marcus, standing off to the side with his notes in hand, didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His calm presence said enough. Claire turned back to the team. Effective immediately, Marcus will be working directly with our engineering consultants on revisions. He'll also advise on future inspections. That was the moment Rick's expression shifted, from irritation to confusion, then something closer to disbelief. He opened his mouth to protest, but found no ground to stand on. The workers filed out slowly, murmuring among themselves. A few clapped Marcus on the back. Others just looked at him differently, as someone to listen to, not ignore. Outside, Rick approached him stiffly. "You really think you're going to run this job now?" he muttered. Marcus looked him square in the eye. "I don't think it, Rick. I was asked to. Because I earned it." And with that, he turned to join Claire in the planning trailer, leaving behind the man who had once mocked him, now forced to confront the limits of his own prejudice. The next week brought visible changes to the site, not just in process, but in attitude. Marcus now had his own office trailer space, a title plaque that read Project Engineer, and a new level of authority that left some older workers stunned. Those who once ignored him now nodded respectfully or waited to hear his input before taking next steps. Rick, however, didn't adjust as easily. He became more rigid, less communicative. During the daily briefings, he avoided eye contact with Marcus and occasionally made passive-aggressive remarks about book-smart kids trying to run a site from a laptop. But even his own crew had started to shift away from his mindset. One afternoon, while reviewing elevation angles near the south support wall, a crane operator flagged Marcus down for advice instead of going to Rick. A few others followed suit throughout the day, gradually acknowledging Marcus not as a peer, but as a leader. The tension between Rick and Marcus finally came to a head during a logistics review in front of the larger team. Rick interrupted mid-sentence. "I've been doing this for 30 years, he snapped. I don't need someone fresh out of college telling me how to build." Marcus paused. The entire site trailer fell silent. He looked at Rick, not with anger, but with resolve. "I'm not here to discredit your experience, Rick," Marcus said calmly. "But when experience becomes a wall instead of a bridge, it holds us back. This project can't afford that." No one spoke, but several heads nodded subtly. Claire, who had been standing nearby, stepped in. "Rick, Marcus was hired to lead this phase. That's not negotiable. What is negotiable is how willing you are to adapt." Rick clenched his jaw, then stormed out of the trailer, leaving the rest of the team standing in quiet realization. A new chapter had begun, and Marcus was at the helm. He hadn't needed to raise his voice. He had simply shown up, done the work, and let the results lead. And now, finally, people were starting to follow. With each passing week, Marcus's influence on the site became undeniable. The blueprint revisions he introduced were not only improving structural efficiency, but also saving the project both time and cost. The senior executives began visiting the site more frequently, often requesting Marcus by name to walk them through progress updates. What made Marcus stand out wasn't just his technical skill. It was the way he respected everyone on site. From the welders and surveyors to the crane operators and electricians, he listened, collaborated, and never carried himself like someone above the team. That authenticity earned him something far more valuable than a title: trust. Meanwhile, Rick found himself increasingly isolated. His sarcastic jabs began falling flat, and his refusal to adapt left him out of key conversations. His pride kept him from apologizing, but the writing was on the wall. Claire quietly reassigned him to a smaller project across town. It wasn't a demotion on paper, but everyone knew what it meant. On Rick's last day, he stood near the gate, watching the workers line up for morning briefing, this time led by Marcus. Claire joined him briefly. "You had a chance to help build more than just a tower here, Rick," she said softly. "You could have helped build a culture." Rick sighed, not saying a word. At the same time, across the site, Marcus stood with his team, explaining the next stage of construction using a 3D model he'd rendered himself. The crew listened attentively. No shouting, no tension, just shared purpose. "Let's make sure we double-check rebar placement here," Marcus said, pointing. "I've updated the schematic based on yesterday's soil compaction results." One of the workers nodded. "Good call, boss." The word made Marcus pause, not in surprise, but in quiet appreciation. He had started this job being dismissed, mocked, and underestimated. Now the same crew saw him as their leader, not because of his title, but because of his consistency. And as the morning sun rose higher over the skeletal framework of steel and concrete, it was clear this building wasn't the only thing being constructed. So was a legacy, and Marcus was laying the foundation. Weeks later, the building's concrete frame began rising quickly, each beam and panel a reflection of months of planning, collaboration, and sharp leadership. Marcus now led all major engineering meetings, and even off-site consultants asked for his opinion before signing off on any change. More impressively, Marcus had begun mentoring younger interns who arrived on site, some of whom reminded him of himself just a year ago, eager but underestimated. He made sure they were heard, even when they doubted their own voices. One afternoon, a small ceremony was held by the city's Department of Urban Infrastructure to recognize exemplary teams on municipal projects. Claire invited Marcus to speak on behalf of the site. Dressed in a navy suit standing on a small outdoor platform, Marcus looked out at the crowd of city officials, engineers, and site workers. "I wasn't supposed to be standing here today," he began, "at least not in the eyes of some people. But I learned something important. Talent doesn't always wear a title, and leadership doesn't always raise its voice." He paused, letting the words settle. "This building behind us isn't just made of steel and concrete. It's made of lessons. Lessons about respect, inclusion, and listening to people before judging them. I hope that's what really stands tall when we cut the ribbon." Applause followed, loud, sincere. In the back, Rick stood quietly, arms folded. He hadn't clapped at first, not because he didn't believe the words, but because they hit too close. Eventually, he joined in. A few soft claps, nothing dramatic, but enough to acknowledge what everyone now knew. Marcus wasn't just the lead engineer. He was the leader everyone had needed from the beginning.